Dear students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today in this module, we will be discussing about the role of microbes and plants in remediation with special emphasis on phytoremediation. Population explosion and industrialization has resulted in the generation of huge amount of pollutants which are discarded into the environment. As a result, it has caused a lot of toxic pollutant entry into the soil, air and water. Now, these pollutants or the toxic pollutants are released from various sources, be it a domestic source or an industrial source. Under the industrial source, there are many different industries starting from the chemical industry, pesticide industry, textiles and so on. Now, these pollutants, once they are present in the soil, they cause a lot of impact on the human health through plants and animals. These toxic pollutants enter into the food chain through the plants and animals, and finally it causes harmful effect on the human beings. So, to avoid the consequences of these pollutants, remediation is very essential. Remediation is nothing but removal of pollutants from the soil. Remediation can be done by physical methods or chemical methods or the biological method. But the biological remediation through microorganisms and plants are more favored because they are cost effective and they are cheap. Because they are cost effective and they are eco-friendly in nature. Now, with this introduction, now let us get into the learning objectives of the module. The learning objectives of this module include to understand the concept of phytoremediation, then we will see what are the different plants that play a role in phytoremediation. We will also understand the mechanism of phytoremediation, we will differentiate the merits and demerits of phytoremediation, then we will also discuss about the different strategies that are used in phytoremediation. Soil, air and water are contaminated from a variety of pollutants. This affects the environment and health of a living being. Most of the contaminants, they enter into the environment from various sources like domestic, industrial and commercial activities. Also, the chemicals and oil spillages, sewerage systems, wastewater treatment plants and non-point sources such as road, storm drains and parking lots also play an important role in emitting or discharging the pollutants into the environment. For decades, these activities have polluted the environment, resulting in a health hazard. Now, to protect the environment and the public from these health hazards, it is essential for us to clean the contaminated sites with a reliable and an eco-friendly technology. Because you need a technology that does not cause any secondary pollution like the physical and the chemical methods. Now, the remediation using microorganisms and plants, they are best and reliable because they remove and degrade the pollutants in an eco-friendly manner, because they do not emit any secondary pollutants into the environment. The plant assisted remediation, which involves interaction of plant roots and associated rhizosphere microorganisms for the remediation of soil and water contaminated with high levels of metals, pesticides, solvents, radionuclides, explosives, nutrients, crude oil, organic compounds are all generally termed as phytoremediation. So, phytoremediation is an emerging economical and an eco-friendly technique. As I told you earlier, the use of living plants for cleaning the contaminated soil, air or water is called as phytoremediation. This term is being in use since 1991. The term phytoremediation is from the Greek word which means phyto means plant, and from the Latin word remedium means to remove the evil. Plants with ability to remove these contaminants from the environment is known for the last 300 years. But the technology has flourished and has been recognized as an eco-friendly technology for the last 20 years. Now, phytoremediation is a promising approach for remediation of organic pollutants and toxic heavy metals. The mechanism of phytoremediation include 1. Extract and translocate the metals to above ground plant tissues like your stem, leaves, etc. 2. To harvest and transform the toxic metal species to a lesser toxic form. 3. To sequester the metal in the roots. 4. To restrict the leaching and mobility of metals to the surroundings. Now, plants use several biophysical and biochemical mechanisms such as adsorption, transport, translocation, hyperaccumulation, transformation and mineralization for remediation of the pollutants. For example, inorganic pollutants are taken up by the plants through the system of nutrient transport. The organic pollutants are degraded endogenously or sequestered in the vacuoles. The host plant is not affected by the toxic xenobiotic compounds. Now, this table shows what are the different plants that are used in phytoremediation so far. You can see on the left side the plants being listed, on the right side the pollutant which they remove. If you see, most of the plants possess a capability of removing heavy metals, especially plants from the Brassica family. Brassica napus, Brassica gensea, they remove a lot of heavy metals like cadmium, lead, selenium, zinc, mercury and copper. Likewise, you also have certain organic pollutants being removed by Populus and Sorghastrum species. Now, let us discuss about what are the characteristics of a plant which has a potential to be chosen for a phytoremediation. An ideal plant for phytoremediation should possess certain characteristics. They should be able to extract or degrade the contaminants of concern. They should adapt to local climates, should possess high biomass, should have a well developed root structure. They should be compatible with the soil where it is grown. They should have a high growth rate, easy to plant and maintain. They should be able to take large amount of water through the roots. Now, what are the advantages of phytoremediation? As I told you earlier, it is an eco-friendly method and is a natural method of remediation. They are cost effective. It can be applied both as in situ and ex situ remediation. These plants can be easily monitored and can be applied to a large area and treat a variety of organic, inorganic pollutants and heavy metals. Now, valuable metals can be recovered and reused by a process termed as phytomining. Now, it is easy to implement and it is accepted by public because it minimizes the spread of pollutants through air and other medium. Also, it is aesthetically pleasing. Now, let us look into the disadvantages of phytoremediation. The remediation is limited because the reachability of roots is less. Roots of certain plants are not so deep to perform well in the phytoremediation process. The phytoremediation is a time consuming process and it takes years for removal of pollutants. Contaminants may be toxic to the remediating plant and it can sometimes kill them or affect them. They are not effective for certain sites where the concentration of pollutants are very high. The process is highly influenced by climate and the soil conditions of that region. Sometimes phytoremediation mobilizes the contaminants which later enters into the water and the pollutant also gets transferred and gets solubilized and transferred into the water medium. Bioaccumulated contaminants like metals, they require safe disposal or recovery. Otherwise, they can enter into the food chain and reach the higher level of consumers in the ecosystem. Now, let us discuss about the different strategies of phytoremediation. Phytoremediation has many strategies. One is your phytoextraction, phytofiltration, phytostabilization, phytodegradation and phytovolatilization. Now, what is phytoextraction? Phytoextraction is also called as phytoaccumulation or phytoabsorption. It is the uptake of contaminants from the contaminated media by host plant roots, which is then translocated and accumulated in the above ground plant biomass. It is mainly used for remediation of polluted soils. Now, phytoextraction can be further categorized into two groups. One is your continuous phytoextraction where hyperaccumulator plants are used. The second type is a chelate induced phytoextraction where the high biomass producing plants and chelating substances are used in chelate induced phytoextraction. Now, let us learn about continuous phytoextraction in little detail. The continuous phytoextraction involves seeding or transplanting of pollutant accumulating plant species into the polluted site, and they are cultivated through the established agricultural practices. The pollutant in the soil is generally absorbed by the roots of the plant. They are translocated and accumulated in the aerial part. Now, hyperaccumulator plant generally can accumulate 100 times more metal than a common plant. It will be able to grow faster. They will have deep and profuse root system and large biomass production. Metals like zinc, copper and nickel are all extracted by the hyperaccumulators. Plants that belong to families like Asteraceae, Brassicaceae, Caryophyllaceae, Cunoniaceae, Cyperaceae, Euphorbiaceae, Fabaceae, Flacutaceae, Lamiaceae, Poaceae and Violaceae are known to uptake and absorb large amount of heavy metals. The process involves repeated cycle of planting and harvesting so that the pollutants are removed from the site. Now, the time period required is very long, and almost it takes around 20 years also to remove a particular pollutant. Now, what is a chelate induced phytoextraction? As I told you earlier, here high biomass yielding variety along with the chelating agents are used for phytoremediation or phytoextraction purpose. Here, when the pollutant is present in the soil, it will be in a non-available form. Especially for pollutants which are present in the non-available form, you can add a chelating agent and then make it bioavailable for the plants to translocate and extract them. So, this will improve the bioabsorption and the accumulation ability of the non-hyper accumulating plant. Now, the different chelating agents include EDTA, nitrilotriacetic acid, ethylene diamine, disuccinate and low molecular weight organic acids. Now, EDTA is a powerful and extensively studied chelating agent. Recently, a biodegradable chelating agent named as EDDS is being used. It is an isomer of EDTA and it is found that they can easily be degraded into less harmful byproducts. Now, the advantages of phytoextraction are the contaminant can be completely removed from the soil, they can be recycled from the accumulated plant biomass, and the disadvantages include the rate of metal uptake by roots and the cellular tolerance to the specific metal. The next strategy is phytoextraction. Now, phytoextraction is an approach in which plants sequester certain contaminants in the root zone. This process involves several plant physiological mechanisms. The phytochemicals secreted in the root zone can immobilize or precipitate the target pollutants. The transport proteins of the root stabilize the target contaminants. The contaminants can also be sequestered by vacuoles present in the roots of the host plant. The next strategy is phytofiltration. Now, phytofiltration is an approach of phytoremediation to remove contaminants from the polluted water. Here, the pollutants are either absorbed or adsorbed by the plant or plant material. This method is used to remove contaminants in the groundwater. Phytofiltration again can be subcategorized into rhizofiltration, where you use the host plant roots, blastofiltration where you use seedling, colofiltration where you use plant shoots. In rhizofiltration, the plants are grown hydroponically. Hydroponic is soil-less culturing of plants. Due to their profuse fibrous roots with root hairs, they result in large surface area, and as a result it provides better performance in rhizofiltration. Now, blastofiltration is again a type of rhizofiltration where the seedlings are used. From the Greek word blasto means seedling. Now, here the juvenile plant seedlings are grown in aerated water and they are more efficient than roots in removing metals. This is called as blastofiltration. Now, blastofiltration is a second generation plant based water remediation technology. Now, it is more efficient than rhizofiltration as the surface to volume ratio is increased after germination and several germinating seedlings absorb and adsorb a large quantity of metal ions. Now, seedling culture can be germinated and they can also be grown in darkness or light. The next strategy is phytostabilization. It is also called as phytoimmobilization. Now, it is a reduction of mobility or bioavailability of contaminants in the contaminated soil through the use of certain species. Here, the plants make the pollutants immobile so that they cannot move to other places, neither they can be solubilized in water. This technique is also called as place inactivation. It is used for the remediation of contaminated soil, sediment and sludge. It is a technique of stabilizing the pollutants in contaminated media, and they prevent the entry into groundwater or into the food chain. This technique is widely used for remediation of metals, especially in soils through sorption by plant roots, precipitation, complexation and reduction in metal valence in the rhizosphere. The toxicity of the metal varies according to the valence of the metal. Plants start secreting certain redox enzymes which convert the toxic metals into a less toxic form. It is useful remediation approach for remediation of metals such as lead, arsenic, cadmium, chromium, copper and zinc. Now, phytostabilization is not a permanent remediation solution as the metal remains in the soil. It is only considered as a management strategy. Now, this approach can be used for re-establishment of vegetation cover in the contaminated sites. Especially when your native plants fail to survive, that particular time you can use this phytostabilization. Now, the advantages of phytostabilization are disposal of plant biomass is not required. They are very effective if quick immobilization is required and to preserve the soil and water surface. Contaminated sites can be prevented from further soil erosion. Likewise, you have certain disadvantages too. The disadvantages are contaminants remain in the soil and the application of extensive fertilizers are required. The next strategy is the phytovolatilization. Here, the pollutants can be uptaken by the plants from the contaminated soil and released into the atmosphere after it is being converted into a volatile form. This technique is mostly used for organic contaminants like your trichloroethane, and some of the heavy metals such as arsenic, mercury and selenium can also be removed by phytovolatilization method. This technique again they can be applied to contaminated soil, sediments and water. But this technique is a controversial technique because here the pollutants are not removed completely. They are only transferred from one media to another. The next strategy is phytodegradation. Now, phytodegradation is a breakdown of organic contaminants with the help of certain enzymes like dehalogenase and oxygenase, which are generally secreted by the plants. This process is independent of rhizospheric microorganisms. Here, plants absorb and accumulate the organic pollutants from the contaminated environment and detoxify them through various metabolic processes, and hence here the plants are called as green liver of biosphere. Phytodegradation is limited to certain biodegradable contaminants, that is organic contaminants including your synthetic insecticides and herbicides. The next type of strategy in phytoremediation is rhizodegradation. The rhizosphere of plants along with the microorganisms associated in the rhizosphere are used. Now, rhizosphere is an area that surrounds the root of the plants. It extends to about 1 mm. The biodegradation of the contaminants in the rhizosphere is enhanced because of increase in microbial density and activity. Now, microbial activity in the rhizosphere can be increased by about 10 to 100 times more when the exudates are secreted by the plant roots. Now, these exudates that is secreted by the plant roots will provide food for the microorganisms because they contain carbohydrates, amino acids and flavonoids. Now, nutrient rich exudates can be utilized as a carbon and nitrogen source by the microorganisms, which again will increase the microbial activity. In addition to energy source, plant roots also release certain enzymes that are capable of degrading these organic pollutants. The last strategy in phytoremediation is phytodesalination. This is one of the recent emerging technique. Here you use halophytes. Halophytes are nothing but salt loving plants. Now, the halophytes are used for removal of salts from the salt affected sites to make the soil suitable for normal plant growth. Certain reports say that halophytes like Suade maritime and Sesuvium portulacastrum have been reported to remove almost 507 and 474 kg of sodium chloride from 1 hectare of saline soil in a period of 4 months. Now, halophytes can also be used to remediate these saline soils and it can be used for crop cultivation after repeated cultivation and harvesting of these halophytes. Now, this table summarizes the different strategies of phytoremediation, where you have phytoextraction, which causes the accumulation of pollutants in harvestable biomass, especially the shoots. Phytofiltration, they sequester the pollutants from the contaminated water by plants. Phytostabilization is nothing but they limit the mobility and bioavailability of pollutants in soil using the plant roots. Phytovolatilization is nothing but it converts the pollutants to volatile form and their subsequent release to the atmosphere. Phytodegradation is a process where the organic xenobiotics are degraded in the rhizosphere using rhizospheric microorganisms. Lastly, the phytodesalination is a process where halophytes are used for removal of excess salt in the saline soil. Same way, this figure also shows how in a particular plant different process can work, like phytovolatilization, degradation, phytoextraction, phytostabilization, rhizofiltration, phytostimulation, etc. To summarize, at the end of this module, we have studied about the definition and concept of phytoremediation. Then we discussed about the mechanism of phytoremediation in pollutant removal. Then we discussed about the different characteristics which you will look into a plant for using it in phytoremediation. We also discussed about the various merits and demerits of phytoremediation. Lastly, we discussed about the different phytoremediation strategies which are used in phytoremediation, like your phytoextraction, phytostabilization, rhizofiltration, phytofiltration, phytosequestration, phytovolatilization and phytodesalination. I hope this module would be of help to you. Thank you.